Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Kof Mem. We begin the 9th perek with the new Mishnah. Mi shemet v'hiniach banim ubanot. Bizman shenechasim merubin, habanim yirshu v'habanot yizonu. Nechasim mu'atim, habanot yizonu v'habanim yishalu al hapetachim. If someone dies and he leaves sons and daughters. So we evaluate how much the inheritance is going to be. How much is all of his property. So if it's a lot, then the sons will inherit and the daughters will get sustenance. We're talking about minor unmarried daughters. They have a right to be sustained by the estate. That's part of the clauses in the ketubah that the estate will take care of the daughters. So let's say the daughters require $50,000 for their sustenance. That's going to include, by the way, their food and clothing and shelter, and eventually when they get married, their dowry that will help them get married, and so on. So we evaluate all that. How much is it going to be? Let's say it's $50,000. And let's say in the estate, there is $200,000. Good, so lots of money, more than enough to cover what the daughters need. In that case, the daughters will get $50,000 and the sons will inherit. The way it would work is actually the sons would inherit everything and they control the estate and they are obligated to pay for the daughters as needed for their sustenance. However, let's say there is insufficient funds. Let's say there's only $50,000 in the estate, and that's how much the daughters themselves need. Well, in that case, the daughters will be sustained, and the sons, they will get nothing. They're going to have to beg in the streets. If they're working, if they're adults themselves, so they'll have their own income, fine. But if they're minors and they don't own anything, they don't have a farm or their own business, then they will have to beg in the street. It's more embarrassing for girls to have to go and beg than for boys. And after all, they get the right to inherit. So there's an upside of being a boy. Usually it is an upside that they get to inherit when there's a lot of money. But when there's minimal funds, the daughters get fed first. And as we're going to see in the Gemara, the way the Gemara will discuss, does that mean that the sons get it and they have to hold it for the daughters? Or do we not even give the sons anything at all and the court will hold it or put it in some fund and the daughters can draw from as they need it? Okay, so that's the Tanakama. Admon Omer, Bishvil shani zachar hifsadeti, Amar Rabban Gamliel, ro'ani et divrei Admon. Admon says, just because I'm a male, I should lose out? If there's insufficient funds, and let's say there's minor boys and minor girls, so just because he's a boy, he has to go and beg, and he gets nothing? It doesn't make sense. So Rabban Gamliel says, I agree with Admon. And instead, Admon would say that if there's insufficient funds, let's say there's only $50,000, so then give 25 to the boys and 25 to the girls. And they'll each have to have only a little bit, and each of them will have to go and beg or figure out some way of getting some funds. That is the opinion of Admon. Now the Gemara clarifies, V'chama merubin, how do we calculate how much they need, for how long, for who exactly? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kedei sheyizonu mehen elu ve'elu shenem asar chodesh. Rav Yehuda says, name of Rav, it's enough that the boys and the girls should be sustained for 12 months. So above the Mishnah, we're really only talking about the girls, but let's use the same example. In the estate, let's see first, how much do the boys need, how much do the girls need? The girls, let's say they need $50,000. And the boys also require $50,000. For how long? For 12 months only, even if the kids are only 7 years old. But we're only going to provide for them for 1 year. After that, what are they going to do? I don't know, but you have 1 year to figure it out. Maybe we'll try to get them married off young or get them some chores. I don't know. We'll figure something out. So sustenance means for 1 year. And so if that's $50,000 for the boys and $50,000 for the girls, then if there's in the estate more than $100,000, that's called merubin. In that case, you'd give the entire estate to the boys and they have to provide $50,000 for the girls, their sisters or half-sisters. But if it's less than that, if it's less than $100,000, then the sons will not inherit but instead the girls will get their full share, $50,000, and then the boys will get whatever is left, as the Gemara will explain in a minute. Ki amrita kameh d'Shmuel amar zo divrei Rabban Shimon ben Rabban Gamliel bar Rabbi avachachamim omrim kedei sheyizonu mehen elu ve'elu ad sheyibageru. So when Rav Yehuda said this before Shemuel, he said, "Oh, that is the opinion only of Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi." However, Chachamim disagree, and they say they only disagree regarding the time period. It's not enough to sustain them for 12 months, but rather until they become an adult, until the daughters become 12 and 6 months. That's how long. So if the daughter is only 6 years old and one is 8 years old and so on, so you calculate how much will be their sustenance until they become adults. Of course, if they get married in between, it's true, then their husbands will take care of them. They could get married as minors if their mother or whatever, or older brother, married them off. But nevertheless, it's not 12 months is not enough. You have to wait until they get older. So it would be a larger amount. So however much that would be, we calculate both the boys and the girls until they become adults. And if there's more than that, then the sons inherit and they provide for their sisters. But if there's less than that, then you give the sisters first, and only whatever is left over will the boys get. Itmar nameh ki ata Rabin amar Rabbi Yochanan v'amri la amar Rabba bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan kol sheizonu mehen elu ve'elu ad sheyibageru hen merubin pachot mikan hare elu mu'atin. We have another statement. The first statement was the opinions of Rav and Shemuel. Well, we have another statement from Eretz Yisrael that agrees with the opinion of Shemuel. And this is reported by Ravin when he came to Bavel in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and some say it's Rabba Bar Chana is the one that said it in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that how much is a large estate when there's sufficient funds to feed the boys and the girls until they become adults. If there's sufficient for that and more, that's called a large estate. And in that case, the boys inherit and provide everything that the girls need. Whereas if it's less than that, there's not sufficient funds for all of that to wait until all of them become adults, then that's considered a small estate. And in that case, the girls get what they need first, and then the leftover the boys get. And so now we want to clarify this language. So the language of the Mishnah itself said, if it's nechasim mu'atim, if it's less, then the girls get sustenance and the boys have to beg. For the literal reading, sounds like the girls get everything. In other words, let's say the girls need 50,000 and the boys need 50,000, and there's only 90,000 in the estate. If you read these words very literally, it sounds like the girls will get 90,000 and the boys get zero. But that doesn't make sense. Why should the boys get zero, even though it's less than the full 100,000 that both of them need? So the girls should take everything. Rather, Rabbi explains, we subtract the amount of sustenance for the girls until they get older, and we put that on the side. That's for the girls, $50,000 for them, and then the remainder, in this case, the extra 40,000, that will go to the sons, and that will sustain them up until it runs out, and only then they will have to go begging. Peshita merubin v'nit ma'atu kebar zachu bahen yorshin mo'atin v'nit rabu mai. Okay, now we talk about a case where, let's say the value of the inheritance changes while they're using it, while they're growing up. So let's say you have a piece of land that is a lot. It's $200,000. Their needs are only $50,000 and $50,000. So this is plenty. That means that the boys are going to inherit it. So that's good. So that's $200,000. But let's say sometime after, this land gets ruined, and now the whole land is only worth $50,000. So that what would we do in that case? Well, it's obvious that once the sons inherit, that's it. They inherit. So they're the inheritors, but they are responsible to pay for the daughters, for their sisters, whatever they need. And therefore, precisely because they're the inheritors, they incur the loss. They're the owners of it. And so they incur all of the loss, and that responsibility to pay for their sisters still stays the same, and therefore they're going to have to give up all that 50,000 and give it to the daughters. The daughters don't lose anything, but rather the boys do. And in the same case, let's say it was 200,000, and then they inherit, and then it went up in value. The boys would get all the upside too. They only have to give the girls 50,000. So that is a simple case. If they inherit, meaning if it's a large estate, then the loss and the gain will be to the boys, but they have to pay the same set amount to the girls. Now, here's the question that is more difficult. Mu'atin v'nit rabu mai. What if it was a small estate and then it got bigger? What if the estate is only 50,000? In which case, that's all going to go to the girls and the boys get nothing. But then it went up. The price all of a sudden of this piece of land went up and it went to 200,000. So now who gets that profit? ברשות יורשין קיימי והלקח ברשות יורשין שבוח או דילמה סלוקה מסלקה יורשין מהכה. Do we say that the inheritance went to the sons anyway, and therefore the sons will get the benefit? In other words, even if it's a small inheritance is only 50,000. Nevertheless, it goes to the sons, and the sons have to give, if let's say it's only 50,000, the sons will have to give all of it to the daughters. But the sons are the ones holding on to it in the meantime, and then it's a debt that they owe as their sisters need it. If you say it that way, that's the mechanism, that's the route it takes, then when it goes up in value to 200, it's the sons that will get the benefit of that. They still have to pay 50,000, but the increase in 150 they can keep for themselves. Is that the way it works? Or maybe we say that these heirs are totally removed from it completely. Since we made an evaluation, it says, listen, there's only 50,000 here, it's all going to go to the girls. Sorry, boys, you get nothing. We're going to put this in an escrow account, and we'll get someone to manage it, and we'll take it. It goes directly to the girls, and the boys don't get anything. If that's the case, then when it goes up in value to 200, then it's the girls that will keep all of that profit. So which way does it go? And we have an answer. Tashema. Amar Rabbi Aseh, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Yetomim shekadmu machru b'nechasim mu'atin, ma shemachru macheru. We have a statement by Rabbi Aseh in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if orphans, that means the boys, went and sold the property when there was insufficient funds, the sale is valid. In other words, it's like this very case where there's only $50,000 and the girls need it. And then the boys, they sold it off and they took the money and they kept the money. Well, it's improper for them to do that because they are responsible to feed their sisters from the estate. But instead, they went and sold it, and that's it. It's not proper to do that because they're getting around their responsibility, and then now there's no estate left for them to provide for their sisters. So although it's improper, but nevertheless, the sale is a sale because they do inherit. It's in their hands, and they're the managers of it. They're the owners of it, even though they owe this money from the estate to their sisters. What we see from here is that even when there is insufficient funds, nevertheless, that $50,000 does go to the boys as heirs. They hold on to it. They're responsible to provide for their sisters. And therefore, if it goes up in value, then the boys will keep all of that added value. Next. Yetib Rabbi Yirmiyah kamed Rabbi Abhu v'ka ba'e mineh. Rabbi Yirmiyah, who was known for asking very technical but perspicacious questions, was sitting before Rabbi Abhu, and he was asking the following questions. Almanato mahu shetema'et b'nechasim. The husband has an obligation. When he dies, the sons will inherit if he has sons. And if he has daughters, he has to provide for the daughters. That we already discussed. But there are other obligations that are built into the ketubah. And one of them is that he has to provide for the widow. When a man dies, then as long as she is not yet married and she's alive, she has a right to live in the house and be sustained from the inheritance. She won't get her big lump sum ketubah payout. She can delay that if she wants. and instead be sustained from the estate. So now the question is, does that amount that the widow is going to take, does that reduce the full amount when we are calculating whether it's a big estate or a small estate? So for example, let's say there's girls and boys, and the girls need $50,000 and the boys need $50,000, and there's $125,000 in the estate, so that's a lot, right? But there's also a widow, and she herself is going to consume $50,000. So do we take that 125, reduce what the widow is going to get, and now it's only 75, and now we call that a insufficient funds, or do we not calculate that? On the one hand, she gets sustenance, so yes, we have to take that into account, and we have to think about all of the possible payouts, and she is certainly a possible payout. Or do we say, since if she gets married soon, she could get married after 3 months, she can go and get remarried, and then the estate will not have to pay for her. So therefore, it's a very iffy if they're even going to have to pay. And therefore, right now, we do not have to take it into account. So that's question number one. And so if we say the negative side of this, that since if she gets married, we won't have to pay. So right now, we can assume that she'll get married soon, and we don't have to take it into account, and we don't reduce her $50,000. If we say that, then here's a more difficult case. Bat ishto ma'oshet tama'et benechasim. Sometimes when someone gets married, the wife might have a daughter from a previous marriage, and she may require a stipulation that says, listen, I want you to take care of my daughter for the next 10 years. No matter what, you and your estate has to take care, even if you die, your estate has to take care of my daughter for 10 years. And that's built into the ketubah. And then sure enough, the guy dies, and now the estate has to take care of her for 10 years. So, and let's say that amount is $50,000. So do we take that off of the 125, and now it's only 75, and now it's insufficient funds, or do we not take it into account? In this case, let's say that daughter is a minor. In this case, even if she gets married, the estate will still have to pay because they gave a certain number of years. They said 10 years. The estate has to pay for her sustenance. Even if she's married, she gets that money. So here, it's more of a guarantee that the estate will have to pay. So more likely that, yes, they should take off that $50,000 from the top and then evaluate if there's enough left for the boys and the girls. Or you might say, since if that daughter dies, then they don't have to get, the estate does not have to pay. It has to pay 10 years, but only if she's alive. So it's not 100% sure that the estate will have to pay for her, and therefore we do not have to take it into account. So here's a more difficult question, because it's more likely that she's not going to die and they're going to have to pay. But even if we answer that in negative, and you say that, no, since she might die, and then we won't have to pay, so therefore we're not going to account for it when we evaluate the inheritance, whether it's large or insufficient funds. Then the third question is, what if that father, before he died, he borrowed money, and he owes someone $50,000? And then he dies. So the estate is required to pay that creditor $50,000. Should we take that off the top? And if the whole estate was 125, and then we should say, okay, you know what? We're going to have to pay this guy 50. So take that off, and now there's only 75 left. And then, that's not enough. Do we take that into account or not? This is more difficult than the previous case, because even if the creditor dies, the heirs of the creditor can still collect it. They can go through the documents that their father left and says, here, oh, look, a loan document. They inherit the credit, and therefore they can go. So this is going to have to this will have to be paid no matter what, even if the creditor dies, and therefore you should take it off the top. Or you can say, right now, it hasn't been collected. And maybe it's not due yet. Maybe the guy is away and he's not going to collect it for a while. Who knows? Maybe he'll forget about it. Right now, it's not being collected. So maybe we could just worry about that later. And we only look at what the estate has to provide now for the sons and the daughters. Okay, these are all three questions. And now that's one version of the three questions. There's another version that flips them around, but they're the same questions, almost the same. The first question that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked was regarding the loan. The loan, which almost definitely will have to be paid, do we take that off the top? Now, if you say, yes, you have to take that off the top, then here's a more difficult question. But what about a daughter that has a guarantee that the estate will pay for that daughter for 10 years? In this case, it's most likely that the estate will have to pay, and therefore you should have to take it off the top. But she might die, and then it won't. So maybe you'll say no. And if you say yes, that in that case also you do remove it off the top, then what about the widow, where it's even less likely that the estate will have to pay it out because she might get married soon, and then they won't have to pay. And so maybe there you wouldn't have to. So that's the third question. In this version, we ask another question. We add one more. Almanato ubat eze mehen kodemet. When let's say there's limited funds in the estate, and the estate has to pay for the widow, as is required in any ketubah, and there's also an obligation to pay some stepdaughter of the husband for whatever 10 years, and there's insufficient funds. Which of them takes precedent, the widow or that daughter, is the last question. All right, these are all the questions that Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, and Rabbi Abahu said, Amar le zil ha'idana v'tal machar. Leave today and come back tomorrow. I have to think about it. These are complicated questions. Let me see if I can find an answer. When the next day Rabbi Yirmiyah came back, Rabbi Abahu said, well, I found an answer to one of your questions. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Aseh, Asu almana esel habat kebat esel ha'achin benechasin mu'atin. Ma bat esel ha'achin habat nizonet v'achin ishalu al ha'petachim. Af almana esel habat almana nizonet v'habat ishal al ha'petachim. So he quotes a law in the name of Rabbi Abba, in the name of Rabbi Aseh, who said that the rabbis consider the widow in comparison with a daughter like a daughter in comparison with brothers when there are insufficient funds. So, just like a daughter, when it comes to the brothers, the daughters get fed and the brothers have to go begging. In other words, when the sons and daughters, and there's insufficient funds, the daughters take precedence. They get the money, and the sons will have to go and beg. So too, when comparing a widow versus a daughter, the widow gets fed, and the daughter will have to go and go get charity and go begging. The reason is because it's more embarrassing for an adult, a widow. Maybe she's elderly. It's more embarrassing for an adult to have to go begging than a child who will have less embarrassment for doing that. Admon Omer, Bishvil Shani Zachar, Hifsadeti. Now the Sefer, the Mishnah said, as the opinion of Admon, he says, it doesn't make sense. Just because I'm a male, I should lose out, and only the daughters get fed, and I have to go begging. So my Kamar, what did he mean by that? What's the difference if he's a boy? Why should that make any difference? Amar Abaye, Hachi Kamar, Bishvil Shani Zachar, Ve'ra'oeni la'asok b'Torah, Hifsadeti. Here's what he meant to say. Because I'm a male, and I am obligated to learn Torah. So now I have to go begging instead of learning Torah. It's going to take a lot of time. So if you have to compare, there's insufficient funds, then you should give the funds to the boys so they can spend time learning Torah. The girls are not obligated to learning Torah, so they won't lose out on that time. So let them go spend the time begging. Amar le Rava, ele me'ata man da'asik b'Torah hu diyarit, de la asik b'Torah la yarit. Rava says, no, that doesn't make sense, because according to your logic, a boy who learns Torah will inherit, and a boy who doesn't learn Torah won't inherit. If the only reason why if you're saying that boys should inherit because they learn Torah, that will only apply to boys who are learning Torah. If there happen to be a boy, but they're not learning Torah, then they don't get it. They get the exemption. There's like in the IDF, even if you say that someone learning Torah is exempt from the army, that's only obviously if they're learning Torah. Everybody would agree. If someone's just sitting there in the yeshiva but not learning anything, then he's not learning Torah. Then for sure he should go to the army. There's no exemption for that. So now we're going to go test out each time and say, oh, there's boys and girls of insufficient funds. This one's learning Torah, so this son will get money. But that son is not learning Torah, he won't get money. That's not how it works. You make a rule about who inherits. Ela amar Rava, hachi ka'amar, b'shvil shani zachar v'ra'oeni lirash b'nechasim merubin, hifsadeti b'nechasim mu'atim. Rather, Rava explains this is what Admon meant to say. Because I am a male and I have a right to inherit when there's a lot of money, should I now lose out when there's a little estate? In other words, because I'm a male, males inherit inherit exclusively when there are daughters. When there's a lot of money, then the males get it. So the male has a benefit in being able to inherit. When it says $200,000, they're going to get $150, and the daughters are only going to get $50. So what? Just because I have that benefit, does that mean I have to have a counteracting negative? It should be the opposite. If I have a benefit in this case, I should have a benefit in all cases. And so the boys shouldn't lose out just because they get a benefit that they inherit. Okay, Torah says that they inherit. What do you want? So now they should have to lose out when there's insufficient funds? No. Rather, Admon says they should share equally when there's insufficient funds. If there's only $80,000, then split 40-40. And then they'll each have to bear the burden of going begging. Good. Next Mishnah. Hiniach banim ubanot vetumtum. Bizman shenechasim merubin hazecharim dochin oto esel nekevot. Nechasim muatim hanekevot tochot oto esel zecharim. If someone dies and he has sons and daughters and he has a tumtum, someone whose gender is indeterminate. So is he going to share in the inheritance with the sons, or does he share in the sustenance with the daughters? Which category will he go into? So if there's a lot of funds, then the boys can push him over to the girls. In other words, let's say there's $200,000 in the estate, and the girls are getting 50, and they're going to get 150. So now the boys, they want to share it with as few brothers as possible. So if there's 3 boys, they each get 50,000. So they're like, Tum, we don't want you. You go with the girls. And so they consider him a girl so that they don't have to share their inheritance. However, if it's insufficient funds, then the girls are getting more money because let's say there's only 50,000. They're going to get the 50,000, and that they have to share. So in that case, they'll tell their tum sibling, oh, listen, we consider you a boy, and therefore get out of here. We're taking all the sustenance ourselves, and the tum is going to be with the boys that only get whatever leftover crumbs there might be. So the tum gets the worst possible outcome of being either a boy or a girl. Ha'omer im teled ishti zachar yitol maneh, yeleda zachar yitol maneh. If a father makes a vow while his wife is pregnant, and he says, if my wife gives birth to a male, then he can take 100. He's going to gift 100 dinar to that boy. And then, sure enough, his wife has a son, then that son will be able to collect 100. And if he says nekeva matayim, yalda nekeva notelet matayim. If he says while his wife is pregnant, if my wife has a girl, then I want that girl to collect 200. So nice that he values a girl more than the boy. In any case, when she gives birth to a girl, then that girl will take 200. So far, that was 2 separate cases. But now, what if he combines the statements into one? And he says, im zachar maneh, im nekeva matayim, ve'yalda zachar unkeva. Zachar notel maneh ve'nekeva notelet matayim. if he said before his wife gave birth, he says, if my wife has a male, then that boy will get 100. If she has a female, then she will get 200. And sure enough, she gives birth eventually to both a boy and a girl. Well, then the boy will get 100 and the girl will get 200. So far, this is all very straightforward. We bring all these cases for the next one that's more complicated. Yalda tumtum eno notel. What if he makes this compound statement and she gives birth to a tumtum? He does not get anything because, well, is he going to get like a boy? Maybe he's a girl. Is he going to get like a girl? Maybe he's a boy. Maybe he's an other, that's a third gender, and gets neither. So we cannot determine, and therefore he doesn't get any money. But if he says, whatever my wife has, I want to give a certain sum, let's say 100. In that case, a tumtum will get, because the tumtum is a perfectly fine child, and no matter what, he said whatever she gives birth to, will get 100. Then the tumtum does get 100. Ve'im en sham yoresh elahu yoresh etakol. And now a separate topic of does a tumtum inherit? Well, the answer is, if there's no other child, the guy has no sons and no daughters, all he has is a tumtum, and he dies, well then he will certainly inherit, because it doesn't matter. If he's like a boy, boys inherit. If he's like a girl and there's no boys, then the girl inherits. Whatever he is, he's a child. And so the tumtum will inherit. But as we said at the beginning over here, if there are boys and girls, then the boys are going to say, no, you're a girl, and the girls say, no, you are a boy. So now we're going to analyze that part of it. Dochinoto v'shakil kebat hakatani sefa yalda tumtum eno notel. There seems to be a contradiction between the beginning of the Mishnah and the end of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah, they spoke about a case where there is a lot of funds, and it said that in that case, the boys push the tumtum sibling away and say, no, you're not inheriting with us. You go and take with the girls. So that sounds like the tumtum will get sustenance along with the girls. So she does get something. The tumtum does get something and is treated like a girl. That's what it sounds like from the beginning. However, the continuation of the Mishnah, where someone says, if I have a boy, then they'll get 100. If it's a girl, then she will get 200, and then has a tumtum, then the tumtum gets nothing, not 100 and not 200, which means the tumtum is not a boy and not a girl, and therefore should get nothing. So which one is it? Is it that the boys push the tumtum away and is considered like a girl, but the Sefa said, well, if it's considered like something, then at least the tumtum should get the minimum amount, whatever it is, should get at least 100. So why get nothing at all? So the answer is, Amar Abaye dochino tov ve'en lo. Abaye said, no, you misunderstood the beginning of the Mishnah. When it says that the boys say, we pushed you out and you're not inheriting with us, it doesn't mean that the tumtum gets sustenance with the nekevot, because when the tumtum goes to nekevot, then also they will push the tumtum out and say, no, you're not a girl, you're a boy. Both of them are going to push the tumtum out in both directions. So the tumtum, because is not a boy and not a girl, actually gets nothing in the resha as well. That's Abaye's solution. Rava says that's not really what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that if it's a big inheritance, then the boys push out the tumtum to the nekevot, which sounds like that the tumtum will get sustenance with the nekevot. And so too, if there's limited funds, so that the girls are being sustained, then they push out the tumtum and say, go to the boys who have less, because there's limited funds. So it sounds like the tumtum is getting with the lesser group, but is getting something. So therefore, Rava has a different explanation. V'sefatan Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. The Tanakama is one opinion, and the Sefa is the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. In other words, according to Tanakama, the tumtum is either a boy or a girl. There's only two categories. We're just not sure which one it belongs to. And therefore, the boys can say, you get the lesser amount. The girls could say, you get the lesser amount. The tumtum will get the lesser amount. Because we can't prove if it's a boy or a girl, so kind of like hamosim achavero. So it gets the lesser amount, but does get something. However, the Sefa is the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that a tumtum tumtum is a third category, not a boy and not a girl. How do we know that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that? It's actually from a Mishnah in Masechet Temurah D'Tanya. Yalda tumtum v'androginos, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer en kedusha chala alehen. This Mishnah is talking about an animal that gives birth. An animal also. It could be a male, it could be a female, or an animal could give birth to tumtum, which has indeterminate, or androgynous, that has both signs of gender. And so, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is talking about a case where this animal is going to give birth to a firstborn, and the owner does not want this to deal with the firstborn, who has to go and give it to a kohen and so on. Instead, he says, I'm going to consecrate the firstborn no matter what it is. If it's a male, then I am going to make it a korban olah. Let's say he owes a korban olah anyway. So now, instead of not having a bechor that he's going to have to give it to a kohen, he consecrates it even before it's born. And then that way, if it's olah can only be a male. So if it's a male, now he can use this for his olah requirement. And he says if it's a female, it can't be an olah, but it can be a shilamim. And so that's what he says. And let's say it turns out that it's born a tumtum or androgynos. In that case, it's not holy at all. It's not a korban olah. It's not a korban shilamim. But rather, it's going to be a regular bechor. It's not holy as a sacrifice. So why does Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel say that? Because he says that a tumtum is not a male and not a female. If it was one or the other, but we just don't know what it is, then that would mean that this animal is safek. It's a olah or safek shilamim. So we have to deal with it. What do you do when something is safek olah, safek shilamim? But in this case, he says no, it's not either. It doesn't fall into the male or doesn't fall into the female category. Since he says that about animals, that applies to humans as well. And so that's why in the Sefer he says, if it's a male, I'm going to give the kid 100. If it's a female, I'm going to give the kid 200. And it ends up to being tumtum. That's not male and it's not female. Rather, it's a third category. Me'etibe. We have a challenge to that opinion. Tumtum yoresh keben v'nizon kebat. Bishlama l'rava yoresh keben b'nechasim mu'atim. V'nizon kebat b'nechasim rubin. We have a braita that says something similar to the Mishnah and says that tumtum does inherit like a son, and it gets fed like a daughter. So you see here that it's certainly the tumtum gets something. So we can explain this according to Rava. When does a tumtum inherit like a son? When there are insufficient funds. As the Mishnah says, when there are insufficient funds and the daughters get more, then the daughters can say, get out of here, you go with the boys. And when will a tumtum get sustenance like a daughter? When there are a lot of funds. And in that case, the sons don't want to share. They say, go to the daughters, and who are getting less. They're getting something, but they're getting less than the sons. So you see that the tumtum is getting something one way or another. But according to Abaye, what does this mean when it says that they will get sustained like a daughter? According to Abaye, this is actually following Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that's a third category, and as a third category, they don't get anything ever. As long as there are some boys and as long as there is any sibling, the tumtum will get nothing. Only, as the Mishnah said, if there is no other sibling, it's the only child, then yes, the tumtum can inherit. But otherwise, it's not going to get nizon. It's never like a daughter. It's never going to get sustenance. That if it's an only child, it can get inheritance, but it's never going to get sustenance alongside a brother. So how does Abaye explain this? And the answer is v'lutamich leRava mayoresh keben. I have a question for you. According to Rava, how will he explain the other side of the equation, that yoresh keben? When did he say yoresh keben? When there's insufficient funds. Well, if there's insufficient funds, let's say there's only $50,000 in the estate, and the daughters require $50,000. In that case, the sons get nothing. So the sons aren't actually getting anything in that case, even according to Rava. So how do you explain this phrase? So even Rava will have to admit that the phrase Yoresh Keben means that he is fitting to inherit like a son. Not that he actually will necessarily inherit. If there's only $50,000 and the daughters require all of that money, then the son gets nothing. It just means that the tumtum will not be in the category of the daughters, but would be fitting to inherit with the boy if there would be any extra money. So too, Abaye says, I can explain this phrase that that the tumtum inherits with the daughter to mean that it's worthy of being sustained, but is not actually sustained. This just means it's fitting to be sustained because it should get something. It is a child after all, but legally they will not give it because it doesn't fit into the category of male or female, but is actually a third category. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.